You think that trust fund was some sacred little nest egg just sitting there for you? How quaint. Your brother Ryan and I siphoned every last cent to keep the family business afloat, and are standing secure here in the gated coastal retreat. It's completely empty now, and if you don't transfer your own savings to cover what we took, I'll make sure every neighbor knows exactly how selfish and ungrateful their favorite wealth advisor really is. Blood means we all sacrifice Claire, especially the one who's always acted like she's above the family. Hi, my name is Claire Bennett. I am 28 years old. I stood frozen in the sunlit community clubhouse of our gated coastal retreat, the ocean breeze slipping through the open doors like it was trying to carry his words away before they could stick. My father had chosen the middle of what was supposed to be a routine family lunch to unload that particular bomb, and the handful of neighbors lingering at nearby tables suddenly found their salads very interesting. I felt the familiar, sarcastic bite rise in my throat before I could stop it. Oh, perfect, another family meeting that was really just him reminding me my money was communal property. I didn't yell, I never do. I simply tilted my head, let a small bitter smile tug at my lips, and said, well, that explains the sudden interest in my portfolio statements. The drive back to my townhouse in the retreat was quiet, except for the low hum of the air conditioning and the sarcastic monologue running in my head. Of course, the trust fund my grandparents had earmarked for me was gone. Of course, my father and my brother Ryan had borrowed it for their latest venture in the family consulting firm they ran out of the retreat's business center. I had suspected something was off when my own attempts to access the account for a potential investment in my wealth advising practice kept hitting dead ends. But I'd chalked it up to paperwork delays. Turns out the delays were just deleted transfer records. That evening, I sat at my kitchen island laptop open, scrolling through the cloud backup I'd set up months ago on a quiet hunch. There they were, screenshots of messages my brother had deleted, timestamps showing transfers from the trust straight into accounts tied to their firm, and a few personal expenses that looked suspiciously like luxury golf club memberships and new boat upgrades. The sarcasm in my thoughts turned sharper brilliant, really. Hide the siphoning in plain sight, and then act shocked when the account balance hits zero. I saved everything heart-pounding with that quiet, determined calm I've learned to lean on. No hysterics, just facts. The next morning, my neighbor, Evelyn Park, always the first to know everything in our tight-knit coastal circle, texted, asking if everything was okay after that tense lunch yesterday. I sent back a neutral reply, but I could already feel the social circle starting to shift. Evelyn was friendly on the surface, but she had a way of turning gossip into neighborhood consensus. I told myself it was nothing. Yet, my colleague Marcus Hale, who worked with me at the wealth advising firm downtown, noticed something was off when I walked in that afternoon. You look like someone just told you the market crashed, he said, sliding a coffee across my desk. I gave him the short version trust fund gone father and brother involved screenshots as proof. Marcus whistled low. That's cold even for family. You need anything, I'm here. It was the first small anchor of support in what was about to become a very lonely storm. 2 days later, my brother Ryan showed up unannounced at my door, the ocean waves crashing in the background like they were mocking the whole situation. He looked every bit the polished retreat resident pressed polo expensive watch, but his eyes had that nervous flicker I knew too well. Dad said you found the messages he started, voice low. Look, it wasn't personal. The firm needed cash flow, the retreat dues were piling up, and you were doing fine on your own salary. I laughed, short and bitter. Right. Because my salary is apparently the family ATM. He tried to spin it as a temporary loan, but the screenshots I pulled up on my phone shut him down fast. He left without another word, but not before muttering that I was making this harder than it had to be. That night, my mother called. I almost didn't pick up, but something in her voice when she said my name made me answer. She sounded tired, less polished than usual. Claire, your father didn't tell me the full extent, she admitted after a long pause. I knew some money was moved, but I thought it was just to cover short-term gaps. I didn't know the trust was empty. It was the partial truth I hadn't expected, the mid-story crack in the family armor. She didn't defend him, but she also didn't offer to fix anything. Just a soft, we're all under a lot of pressure here, in the retreat. I hung up feeling that familiar, sarcastic, edge-sharpened pressure. Sure, the kind that apparently required emptying my future to solve. The following weekend, the community association meeting turned into the first real public hit. Evelyn Park stood up during the open forum, and with a concerned smile that didn't reach her eyes, mentioned some family financial tensions that might affect the retreat's reputation for stability. Heads turned toward me. My father had clearly been planting seeds. I sat there quietly, determined, refusing to flinch, but inside, the bitterness boiled. The social circle I'd quietly built over years of living here, brunches, charity events, casual dockside drinks, was starting to fracture. Whispers followed me out the door. Marcus texted later. Saw the looks. Hang in there. I spent the next week gathering more evidence, cross-referencing the deleted messages with bank records I could legally access through my firm. Every new screenshot felt like another small, satisfying jab back at the lies. But the pressure kept building. Ryan sent a few carefully worded texts trying to guilt me into silence. And my father stopped by my office once, voice low and cutting, reminding me how quickly reputations could crumble in a place like this. I smiled that same bitter smile and told him I was just doing what any good wealth advisor would, protecting my own assets. The tension was reaching a breaking point when my mother's partial admission started to feel like it might be the only crack I'd get. I knew I had to decide soon whether to confront the whole thing publicly or walk away before the social circle turned completely against me. That quiet moment of decision in my townhouse felt heavier than any balance sheet I'd ever audited. I sat there staring at the screenshots on my laptop, the deleted messages between my father and my brother, spelling out the siphoning in cold, time-stamped detail. The sarcasm that had been my shield for years sharpened into something almost comforting, bitter, yes, but steady. I wasn't going to scream or beg. I was going to document every single transfer, every lie they told the rest of the retreat social circle, and then I was going to decide exactly how much of this family I could afford to lose. The next few days unraveled faster than I expected. My father started it, of course. He cornered me at the community dock one evening while I was walking back from a late client call, the salt air thick around us. Claire, you're making this personal when it's just business, he said, voice low, and laced with that familiar cutting sarcasm he reserved for me. Your brother and I kept the firm running, so The whole family keeps it standing here. Transfer what you can from your personal accounts by the end of the week, or I'll have no choice but to explain to everyone how you're refusing to help when we're all in this together." I met his eyes with the same quiet determination I'd perfected over years of watching him favor my brother and replied, "Funny how together always means my money." He walked away without another word, but the damage was already starting. By the following afternoon, the whispers had spread. Evelyn Park, my neighbor, who had once invited me to every charity brunch, accidentally left a group chat open on her phone at the clubhouse cafe. I caught the tail end of it. My father had apparently shared a carefully edited version of events, painting me as the one hoarding resources while the family firm struggled. Marcus Hale pulled me aside later at the office. "Heard some noise at the Retreat Association meeting this morning," he said quietly, sliding a fresh coffee my way. "Your dad's framing it like you're the one who pulled the plug on family support." "Want me to say something?" I shook my head, the bitterness rising like bile. "No. Let them talk. I've got the screenshots." That night, my mother called again, her voice softer than I'd heard in months. She didn't lead with defense this time. "Claire, I saw some of the messages your brother tried to delete," she admitted after a long pause. I knew money had moved, but I didn't realize how much or how completely they drained the trust. "Your father told me it was temporary, just to keep appearances up in the retreat." I should have asked more questions. It was another partial crack in the wall, enough to sting, but not enough to fix anything. I listened without interrupting, letting the sarcasm stay locked behind my teeth. She ended the call with a quiet, "We're still family." And for the first time, I wondered if she actually believed that or if she was just buying time. The social circle's shift hit harder the next weekend. The retreat held its monthly harbor gathering, nothing formal, just residents milling around with drinks and small talk. But this time, the energy felt different. Evelyn approached me near the water's edge, her smile tight. "Claire, some of us are worried about the firm's stability affecting property values here. Your father mentioned you're holding back on helping. Is everything okay?" I kept my face neutral, the quiet determination keeping my voice even. "Everything's fine, just some internal accounting I'm handling." But I saw the glances exchanged behind her. My brother Ryan was there too, laughing a little too loudly with a couple of the older investors, occasionally shooting me looks that said he knew exactly what was being said. I spent the following week building my case like any other client file. More deleted message screenshots surfaced in the backup's conversations, where my father and Ryan had joked about how Claire will never notice until it's too late. The bitterness in my chest felt almost satisfying, now a sharp edge I could use. Marcus offered to run a quiet second opinion on the financial trail through the firm's secure system. "This isn't just family drama anymore," he said one afternoon in the break room. "If they're using the retreat's business address for any of this, it could drag the whole association into it." I nodded, grateful for the one ally who wasn't tied to the coastal gossip mill. Then the first real public crack appeared. My father scheduled an emergency association board call open to all residents, and somehow my name ended up on the agenda as financial transparency concerns. I showed up anyway, laptop in hand, screenshots ready on a private drive. The room was packed. Evelyn sat near the front, looking concerned in that performative way she had. My brother Ryan was there beside my father, both of them projecting calm authority. My father stood first. We're all neighbors here, and when one family member refuses to support the shared business that keeps our property values high, it affects everyone. The sarcasm nearly escaped me in a laugh, but I held it. I waited my turn, then calmly projected the first screenshot onto the shared screen. This is what support looked like: deleted messages showing the trust fund emptied without my knowledge. Gasps rippled through the room. My brother's face went tight. My father tried to pivot, calling it misinterpreted family loans, but the screenshots kept coming. One after another, the evidence of hidden siphoning filled the screen. Evelyn's expression shifted from concern to discomfort. A few other residents I'd considered casual friends started muttering. The meeting ended without a formal vote, but the damage was done. The social circle that had once welcomed me was fracturing in real time. Later that evening, my brother showed up at my door again, this time alone. The ocean wind whipped around us as he stood on the porch, looking less polished than usual. "Claire, you didn't have to do that publicly," he said, voice low. "Dad's furious. The retreat's talking. Just transfer enough to make this go away, and we'll figure the rest out quietly." I crossed my arms, the bitter laugh finally slipping out. "Quietly. Like you quietly emptied my trust fund." He hesitated, then dropped his voice even lower. "Look, there's more to it than you know. Dad had some debts he didn't want anyone finding out about. I helped cover them, but it snowballed. It wasn't a full confession, but it was the closest thing to one I'd heard, and it landed like another slap. I closed the door on him without answering, heart pounding, with that mix of quiet determination and rising exhaustion. The reputation I'd built here, the one that had let me thrive as a wealth advisor in this exclusive coastal world, was crumbling faster than I could document it. My mother texted the next morning, another partial olive branch. "Your father is under a lot of pressure. I wish things hadn't gone this far." Pressure, always that word. I stared at the message until the sarcasm turned into something colder. The social circle wasn't just turning against me anymore. It was actively choosing sides, and I could feel the isolation settling in like the evening fog rolling off the water. I knew the next confrontation was coming, and this time it wouldn't be behind closed doors. My father had already hinted at involving the association's legal counsel if I didn't cooperate. Marcus warned me the firm partners were starting to hear rumors too. The lies were unraveling instantly, just like the deleted messages had predicted, but instead of relief, I felt the weight of what walking away would actually cost me. The lies were unraveling instantly, just like the deleted messages had predicted. But instead of relief, I felt the weight of what walking away would actually cost me. I barely slept that night. The ocean waves outside my townhouse, sounding less like a lullaby and more like a mocking reminder that even the view I'd paid for came with strings attached to people who'd never respected me. By morning, the sarcasm in my head had settled into a cold, steady rhythm, bitter, yes, but useful. I printed every screenshot, organized the timestamps, and drove to the community clubhouse for the Emergency Association Board meeting my father had conveniently called. If they wanted to make this public, fine, I'd bring the receipts. The room was already full when I walked in the salt-tinged air, thick with whispers. Evelyn Park sat front and center next to Patricia Lang, the board president, both of them wearing the same practiced look of concern that hid something sharper. My father, Victor Bennett, stood at the front like he owned the place. My brother Ryan right beside him, arms crossed, in that fake solidarity pose they always pulled when the family image was on the line. Diane, my mother, was in the back row, eyes down the partial truths she'd fed me on the phone, clearly not enough to keep her from showing up for appearances. I took a seat near the back laptop, ready, and waited for the inevitable opening jab. Victor didn't waste time. Neighbors, we're here because one of our own is putting the entire retreat's stability at risk by refusing to support the family firm that keeps our property values where they are. His voice carried that sarcastic edge he loved, the one that always made it sound like I was the problem. Ryan nodded along, and a few heads turned toward me. Evelyn leaned over to Patricia and murmured something I couldn't hear but could guess. The bitterness surged, but I kept my face calm, quietly determined. When Victor called for transparency, I stood up without being asked. I connected my laptop to the projector, the click of the cable loud in the sudden quiet. Since we're all about transparency, I said, my tone flat and laced with the sarcasm I'd been holding back for weeks. Let's look at what actually happened to the trust fund my grandparents set up for me. Slide after slide filled the screen, deleted message screenshots, transfer records, timestamps, showing money funneled straight into the firm and then into personal luxuries. The room went dead silent, except for a few sharp intakes of breath. Ryan's face drained of color. Victor tried to interrupt, calling it internal family accounting, but I kept clicking. One message in particular stood out, my father texting Ryan Claire. Won't notice until it's too late, keep her out of the loop. Keep. Evelyn shifted uncomfortably. Patricia Lang cleared her throat and asked if this was really the place for family matters, but the damage was already spreading. Whispers turned into open murmurs. Someone in the back row, a longtime resident I'd once chatted with at dock parties, muttered that maybe the Bennetts had been stretching the truth about their finances all along. The social circle I'd spent years building here was collapsing in real time. Not because of anything I'd done, but because the truth I'd exposed made everyone question who they'd been aligning with. Victor's reputation, the one he'd built on polished presentations and quiet pressure, was crumbling publicly, and I could see it in the way people avoided his eyes. After the meeting broke up in awkward clusters, Ryan caught me outside, near the parking lot. The wind off the water whipped at his polo shirt as he looked around to make sure no one was close enough to hear. "Claire, wait," he said, voice lower than I'd ever heard it. This was the ending twist I hadn't seen coming. He ran a hand through his hair, the polished brother facade cracking completely. Dad's debts were worse than I let on. The firm wasn't just struggling, it was sinking. We siphoned the trust because the bank was about to call in everything. I told him it was a bad idea, but he said blood meant we all sacrifice, especially you. I went along with it. I deleted the messages because I knew how it would look. He paused, eyes flicking to the clubhouse doors. I never meant for it to empty completely, but once it started, we couldn't stop. I stared at him, the sarcastic laugh bubbling up before I could stop it. Blood means sacrifice. That's rich coming from the guy who helped drain my future to prop up your mistakes. He didn't argue. He just looked tired, defeated, and for once there was no spin. My mother appeared a moment later, hovering at the edge of the lot, but she didn't step in. She'd already given me her partial truth on the phone. There was nothing left to add that would change this. The three of them stood there together, the family unit that had always closed ranks, while the retreat's residents filed past, giving them wide berth. The social circle had collapsed, not just around me, but around them too, in a way that left me standing alone in the middle of it. I didn't scream or cry in front of them. I simply looked at Victor one last time and said, voice steady with that bitter calm I'd perfected, "I'm done. No transfers. No more meetings. No more pretending blood means loyalty when it only ever meant my money. You made your choices. I'm making mine." I turned and walked to my car without waiting for a reply. Behind me, I heard Evelyn quietly telling Patricia that perhaps it was best if the Bennetts handled their own issues privately from now on. The isolation settled in like the evening fog, thick and final. No one followed me. No one texted later to check in. The circle I'd thought was mine had chosen the easier narrative, and I was on the outside for good. That night, back in my townhouse, I let the emotional breakdown come. I sat on the floor with the printed screenshots scattered around me and cried ugly, shaking sobs that felt like they'd been building for years. The sarcasm that had carried me through the meetings finally cracked, leaving raw bitterness and the sharp ache of realizing blood really didn't mean loyalty. My father, my brother, even my mother with her half admissions, they'd chosen the firm, the image, the retreat status over me every single time. I cried until my chest hurt, until the quiet determination I'd clung to felt paper thin. But somewhere in the middle of it, the tears slowed. I wiped my face, looked at the empty trust fund statements one last time, and felt something shift. Not victory, not revenge. Just the calm, defiant strength of knowing I was finally choosing myself, even if it meant walking away with nothing but my own name and the freedom to rebuild somewhere they couldn't reach. The next few weeks were quiet in the worst way. Marcus Hale from the firm was the only person who reached out consistently, offering to help me quietly transfer my remaining client files to a new advisor role he'd heard about in a neighboring coastal town. I took the offer not because I needed saving, but because it was the practical next step. I listed my townhouse with a discreet broker, sold it at a fair price, and packed my things without fanfare. No goodbye party, no final confrontation. Just a quiet move out under the cover of an early morning fog. Victor tried one last call. I let it go to voicemail. Ryan sent a single text apologizing again. I deleted it, unread. Diane left a voicemail about maybe talking when things cooled down. I blocked the number. The social circle that had once felt like home had collapsed completely around me, and I didn't look back. I drove away from the gated coastal retreat with the windows down, the ocean air hitting my face one final time. There was no dramatic karma, no public takedown that fixed everything. My father and brother still had their firm, their debts, their tarnished reputations, in a place that now whispered about them instead of me. But I had something they couldn't touch, the quiet, empowered freedom of knowing I'd set the boundary and meant it. The emotional breakdown had passed, leaving behind a calm, defiant strength I hadn't known I possessed. Blood does not mean loyalty. It never did. And there's no guilt in leaving when staying would have cost me everything I'd worked for. I settled into a smaller place. A few towns over, started the new role and rebuilt slowly. Some nights, the isolation still hit quiet dinners alone. No family texts, no retreat brunches, but it felt honest. I'd chosen myself, and that was the only loyalty that mattered anymore. Thank you for listening to my story. Drop your thoughts below on whether blood really means loyalty when it only ever took from you, or if walking away with nothing but your own peace was the only choice that ever made sense.